Okay, let's unpack this. We talk a lot about the big, visible infrastructure, the bridges, the towers, the power lines. But today, we're diving literally beneath the surface into something absolutely critical for life safety that few people ever see: underground firefighting pipes.
Exactly. These are the hidden veins of our public safety system, the supply lines feeding every single hydrant and sprinkler system.
Hmm.
And while they are essential, the process of installing them, well, it involves one of the most consistently hazardous jobs in the entire construction industry.
And that's digging a deep, narrow trench.
That's it.
Our source material for this deep dive is a really comprehensive safety training program. It draws heavily on federal excavation rules, what everyone knows as the OSHA standards, and it blends them seamlessly with the functional requirements from fire protection guidelines, specifically NFPA.
Right, and this is material that workers typically spend a full day, sometimes more, just absorbing.
And that time investment is necessary because of the stakes.
It really is. Our mission for you, the listener, is to take that dense, 4 to 8 hour safety session and just distill it down to the core crucial insights. We're focusing specifically on the hazards you find when you're carving out those specific trenches for fire lines, and more importantly, how the rules prevent tragedy.
Because the statistics here they're really sobering. The source material highlights that trend collapses are swift and they're brutal. They cause dozens of fatalities every single year.
And it's the single leading cause of death associated with trench work. That's why understanding the preventative steps it's not optional.
Absolutely. So if you are prepping for a site meeting or maybe you're just curious about what lies beneath your street, the core objective here is simple.
Yeah, it's to recognize those excavation hazards, the cave-ins, the utility strikes, the falls, and to know the required controls to make sure those fire lines are installed safely and, reliably.
So let's start with that, the unique risk profile. Why is digging a fire pipe trench different from, say, digging a wide drainage ditch? What makes it so specific?
It really comes down to dimension and location. The sources point out that fire protection piping often requires these very narrow trenches, just wide enough for the pipe and the worker, sometimes only 4 feet wide.
Okay, so it's tight.
Very tight, but they're also typically deep, ranging from 4 up to 12 feet. And critically, because these lines connect to buildings, they are almost always located on congested urban sites. The utility density is it's extremely high.
So you have a deep, narrow slot cut into the ground in an area already riddled with existing infrastructure.
Exactly.
That brings us straight to the big four hazards outlined in the training material. Let's start with the obvious one, the primary killer: cave-in or collapse.
The force involved in collapses, it's astronomical. Just 1 cubic yard of dirt. So think of a 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot cube
Right.
that can weigh over 3,000 pounds.
Wow.
That's the weight of a small car landing on a person. And while any trench can collapse, the narrow nature of these fire pipe trenches, it just drastically increases the risk. There's less room for the ground to settle safely, and recovery is often impossible.
The second major hazard is one that often makes the news: striking underground utilities. If these are urban sites, there are, wires and pipes everywhere.
That's the core issue. You're not just dealing with the typical power, gas, and water lines. You're also dealing with telecom, fiber optics, and crucially, potentially existing or even abandoned wire lines or other conduits.
So the danger isn't just an outage.
Oh, not at all. Striking a gas line causes an explosion. Striking a major electric line, electrocution. Hitting a pressurized water main causes immediate flooding and an even greater collapse risk. All of these consequences immediately compound the life safety risk on site.
But wait, if everyone is supposed to call the 811 system the call before you dig service, why is this still hazard number 2? Where does the system break down in the field?
That's a fantastic question. The sources suggest a few failure points. First, just human error. The markings are sometimes faded or incorrect. Second, the sheer density of abandoned lines or old infrastructure that may not even be on current maps.
Things no one knows are there.
Exactly. And third, and this is probably the most common, just impatience. People skip the mandatory wait period or they ignore the markings, assuming they know better.
Moving on to the third hazard. Hazardous atmospheres. I imagine being in a narrow, deep trench is essentially a confined space.
Precisely. The training requires testing for atmospheres because you risk 2 things. 1, low oxygen levels, especially if there's organic material decomposing nearby. And 2, exposure to toxic gases. In older cities, methane or sewer gas can accumulate really rapidly in those confined trench spaces.
And if you nick a sewer lateral,
The trench becomes instantaneously deadly.
And finally, the fourth major risk is water accumulation or flooding. This seems to threaten both the worker and the final product.
It absolutely does. Water ingress is a major, major factor. It can come from rain, seepage through the soil layers, or hitting an existing water main. For the worker, the consequences are immediate. There's the risk of drowning, which is rare, but more common is just the difficulty of escape when you're moving through knee-deep sludge.
Right.
But critically, water immediately compromises the trench's structural integrity. It turns stable soil into something more like quicksand, and that jeopardizes the pipe bedding and the stability you need for future restraints.
That is a terrifying list of hazards, so it means prevention is not optional. Let's talk about mandatory prevention, starting with pre-excavation planning. What's the non-negotiable first step before a backhoe even turns on?
It always starts with the utility locate, using the 811 or your local one-call system. The sources stress this isn't something you do on the day you dig.
Right, you can't just call on your way to the job site.
No, you have to contact them at least 2 to 3 days beforehand. That's to ensure every single existing utility, electric, gas, water, telecom is clearly marked on site, usually with paint or flags. If you skip this, you are effectively gambling with lives.
Once that preliminary work is done, the most powerful job on the construction site comes into play. The competent person. This person holds some serious authority, right?
Absolutely. This designation is really the cornerstone of excavation safety. The competent person must be specially trained, and they're legally required to have daily oversight. They inspect the site at the start of every shift, and critically, they have to re-inspect immediately after any event that could change soil stability.
Like a heavy rainstorm.
Exactly, or even if heavy equipment vibrates the trench walls too much.
So they aren't just an inspector ticking boxes, they are the immediate decision maker on site.
They have 3 core non-negotiable duties. First, they must classify the soil. Second, based on that classification and the depth, they select the appropriate protective system. And third, they possess the absolute authority to stop work instantly if they identify a hazard.
Instantly.
If the competent person sees a crack starting in the wall, they yell, "Everyone out!" and work stops until that hazard is fixed, no questions asked.
Let's focus on that first duty, soil classification. I hear technical terms like type A, B, and C. For us, the learners, how should we think about these types?
Just think of it as a stability scale. Type A is the most stable, and Type C is the least stable.
Okay.
Type A is usually a cohesive clay that holds its shape really well. Type B is a bit granular or might have some cracks, but it's generally okay. Type C is the scary one.
And type C is?
Type C is basically granular, easily flowing soil. So think loose sand, gravel, or soil where water is seeping in. If you dig a hole in Type C soil, it wants to collapse almost immediately.
And I'm guessing that's pretty common.
Incredibly common. Because fire lines are often placed in utility corridors where the soil has been dug up and put back multiple times over decades. It's almost always disturbed soil.
That soil classification leads us directly into those rules. We're talking about the 5-foot rule for protection systems.
That's the key trigger. Protective systems are mandatory for any trench that reaches 5 feet deep or greater. But, this is important, if the competent person sees even minor signs of instability in the soil, maybe a small sloughing or a crumbling edge, they must require a protective system sooner.
Regardless of depth.
Regardless of depth. The industry mantra is slope it, shore it, or shield it.
Okay, let's detail those 3 protective pillars, starting with sloping. What does that mean?
Sloping or benching is simply angling the walls back to a safe, stable degree. Now remember that Type C soil, the least stable one.
Yeah.
The rules specify that for Type C, you must use a 1.5 horizontal to 1 vertical angle, which is a very technical way of saying for every foot the trench goes down, you must pull the excavation back 18 inches horizontally. It takes up a massive amount of space, but it creates the safest environment.
Then you have shoring.
Shoring is mechanical stabilization. If you can't pull the walls back, maybe because you're right up against a building, you use support systems. Things like aluminum hydraulic jacks or timber structures to physically hold the trench walls up against the immense pressure of the soil.
And the third system, shielding, which is probably what most people have seen, the trench box.
Trench boxes are crucial on any pipe job, but here is the critical distinction the sources clarify. A trench box is designed to protect the workers inside it from the collapse.
Okay, so it's a safe zone.
It's a temporary movable cage. It does not prevent the actual cave-in of the trench walls around it. It is essentially a personal protective enclosure, a last line of defense. Knowing that distinction is vital for site management.
That brings up access and egress. Once you're 4 feet deep or more, the rules dictate how fast you can get out.
Absolutely. Time is everything in an emergency. Ladders or stairs must be available so that workers are never more than 25 feet of lateral travel away from an exit.
And there's a rule about the ladder itself, right?
Yes, and this is a common violation. The ladder must extend 3 feet above the trench edge. That's so you can safely step on and off without having to reach blindly for the top rung and risk a fall.
Beyond the walls themselves, site management is key. We need to talk about housekeeping, specifically managing the spoil piles, all the doot you just dug up.
This is a deceptively simple rule, but it is life-saving. Those spoil piles, along with any heavy equipment, must be kept a minimum of 2 feet back from the trench edge.
Why 2 feet?
Think of it like this. If you stand right on the edge of a snowdrift, your weight alone can cause it to shear off. The same concept applies here. That 2-foot setback prevents the massive weight of the soil from overloading the unstable lip of the excavation, which could trigger a collapse.
And since we discussed water as a major hazard, how is water control managed?
Any accumulated water has to be pumped out immediately. If the competent person expects water issues, maybe they see a high water table or heavy rain is predicted, they must use physical barriers or special supports. This ensures the water doesn't destabilize the trench bottom, which, as we mentioned, is crucial for the pipe bedding later.
And atmosphere testing, when is that required?
It's mandatory for trenches deeper than 4 feet, or any time the competent person even suspects toxic gases might be present. They have to use specialized equipment to check oxygen levels and test for common dangers like hydrogen sulfide or methane before anyone enters.
Okay, so now we transition. We've gone from general digging safety to the specific requirements for fire pipe integrity, which are governed by NFPA standards. General OSHA rules keep the workers safe, but these next steps make sure the fire system actually works when the fire department needs it.
That's the perfect synthesis. For instance, we talked about utility strikes. If you know you have marked utilities nearby, you can't just blindly keep digging with a backhoe, even if you've called 811.
And that's where the concept of hand digging or daylighting comes in.
Exactly. Daylighting means using hand tools, a shovel, maybe a vacuum excavator, within 2 feet of any marked utility to physically expose the line safely. This precision work is mandated to avoid severing an existing line with the bucket of a big machine.
And once the trench is safe and ready, the pipe itself has to sit correctly. What about the pipe bedding?
This step defines the long-term reliability of the system. Fire pipes have to be bedded on stable, compacted material, typically a layer of sand or fine gravel. And the rule is firm. You absolutely must avoid placing the pipe directly on rocks or boulders.
Why is that?
Because they create high-stress points that can crack the pipe when pressure is applied or the ground settles over time.
We hear about the structural supports required at bends and fittings, thrust blocks and restraints. What exactly are those and why are they so critical for a fire line?
Think of the fire system as a high-pressure cannon. When water rushes through a pipe and hits a bend, like a 90-degree elbow, that force tries to push the pipe apart at the joint.
Right, the water wants to go straight.
Precisely. Thrust blocks are massive concrete anchors, or buttresses, poured around the fittings and against the stable trench wall. They're required by NFPA to prevent the pipe from pulling apart under the immense water pressure required to fight a fire.
So the trench itself must be planned to accommodate not just the pipe, but enough space to actually pour this foundational concrete.
Exactly. A trench that's too narrow to fit the correct size of thrust block compromises the entire long-term integrity of the fire system.
And the final act of installation, which surprisingly causes the most future headaches if it's rushed, backfilling the trench.
Backfilling is crucial, and it has to be done carefully in thin, compacted layers. If you just dump all the dirt back in and don't compact it properly, the soil will settle over time. That settlement can lead to future sinkholes, but worse, it can place shear forces on the installed pipes or break connections, potentially leaving the fire system useless years later.
And as a final note on physical safety, we can't forget the basic gear, which the source reminds us is always essential.
Always. Hard hats, high-vis vests, gloves, steel-toe boots, and eye and ear protection. The basics are non-negotiable.
So what does this all mean? We've completed this deep dive into the surprisingly complex world beneath the sidewalk. We've seen that installing underground firefighting pipes isn't just about digging a hole. It's a high-stakes, highly regulated process where ensuring worker safety, that's OSHA, is deeply interwoven with ensuring system reliability. That's NFPA.
It means every minute spent on meticulous planning, from calling 811 to designating a competent person with the authority to stop work, is an investment. It pays dividends in both lives saved today and guaranteed infrastructure integrity tomorrow. The entire system rests on the expectation that these foundational safety rules are followed perfectly.
The source material placed huge emphasis on meticulous work, from properly bedding the pipes to the careful compaction during backfilling, all to prevent settlement or displacement down the line. This raises an important question for you, the learner, to consider.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, how many hidden infrastructure failures, and not just in fire systems, but in roads, utilities, and foundations, start not with a material failure, but with a simple mandatory failure during the excavation phase? We're talking about failure to follow basic trenching rules, like keeping spoil piles 2 feet back or properly compacting tight sea soil. This often overlooked knowledge of foundational safety is the only true source of reliability.